The real estate industry as we know it today is under assault, and real estate brokers across the country are losing their minds. What you should know and why it matters. I'm Jason Schmidt, and this is the Weekly Mail. For the past several years within the brokerage industry, there has existed this on-again, off-again flurry of noise about the potential for an upending of the financial structure that drives this business. The source of this agitation surrounds a number of lawsuits filed against the National Association of Realtors, NAR, Zillow, a collection of MLS systems, and several parents to large franchise operations, and one is now a large certified class action suit. I have very formed opinions on the substance of these actions, as well as how those who practice within the industry should react. But before we go any further, please remember to like and subscribe to stay up to date with our real estate and financial market news. Also, over 80% of viewers of our content are not subscribed, so please be sure to subscribe and like so we're able to grow this channel as much as possible and provide more valuable and frequent content. So let's start with disclosure. I am not a lawyer, I do not pretend to be a lawyer, and my assessment of these legal actions is purely coming from my experience in this business and this industry. So, one of the class action suits is the Sitzer-Burnett case, which, to use one of the supercharged words of the day, is not systemic due to it being limited only to the state of Missouri, which was set for trial in February of 2023, but is now postponed indefinitely. The other is the Morrill case, the more substantial of the two, and the one that is causing the greatest amount of agita today because it was just certified as a class and has the capacity to affect several states, and because of what would likely be many ensuing lawsuits to follow, potentially the entire industry. The allegations surrounding these actions involve the cooperation mandate within NAR's rules that govern local realtor associations, MLS systems, brokerages, and ultimately individual real estate agents. This cooperation mandate requires any listing broker to make a public offer of compensation to a potential buyer's broker, which ostensibly requires listing brokers to require a home seller to pay the buyer's broker a commission, because after all, you cannot make an offer for compensation to an unknown third party, the buyer's broker, unless there is already that compensation mechanism in place. It also prevents any negotiation between the listing broker and the buyer broker. The fee is what it is, regardless of any other factor. So the rub in the class action suits is the plaintiffs in these actions allege this cooperation requirement is not competitive and falls under the purview of the federal government's antitrust powers. This is because there is no requirement for buyer-broker fee disclosure to be made to any party other than the buyer broker, and the fee paid to that broker is forced, which, according to the plaintiffs, leads to an excessive and unnecessary fee structure for a seller. So, being that I am a broker, what do I think about all of this? First, let me say a couple of things. This industry is full of noise, mess, and unnecessary problems. So, the fact that this is ripping through real estate industry news is not shocking. Second, just to get my personal biases out on the table, I find the National Association of Realtors to be a professional association in name only. I cannot articulate any value it adds to this industry, and if it were not for myself being required to be a member in order to functionally participate in this business and gain access for our agents to various systems, I would not be a member. It functions about as efficiently and with the best intentions of its constituency, real estate brokers and practitioners, on a similar level as our US federal government, if that gives you any indication as to its level of usefulness. Okay, so now on to business. Let's look at each side and address their respective positions. In the class actions, first, let's look at the plaintiffs. The allegation here is that home sellers were forced to pay a buyer-broker commission that, in a properly competitive market, would otherwise be paid by the buyer. The contention is really underpinned by the idea that sellers have no choice but to pay high commissions to attract buyer brokers when they otherwise would not. The mechanism here, and why multiple listing services are included in this action, is that broker membership within an association is usually required, and the broker's agents, in order to gain access to that MLS system, is also required. So in essence, because NAR requires its members to make a blanket offer of compensation within any listing, and because virtually all listings are posted through MLS systems, and because brokers have no other reasonable option than to list properties through their MLS system, the fee structure is punitive and anti-competitive to the seller right out of the gate. With no other context, I can see how that conclusion would be drawn. From the defendant's position, NAR in particular, there is a missing piece. and that is the contract relationship between the seller and the listing broker. Within that listing contract, all fees are outlined and agreed to, and I can tell you as a broker, those fees are always the substance of negotiation. Though individual markets do usually offer some range of pricing for services, nothing is set in stone. There is no ambiguity from a seller's position on who is paid what. There are also a variety of business models a homeowner can choose from. Full service models that will handle everything from helping to prepare a home for sale, to actively selling the property through all showings, to negotiating, to managing the contract process, to vetting buyers, to coordinating all closing details. And then there are flat fee brokerages that, for a couple $100, will simply put the property in the MLS and direct all communication and activity directly to the seller. Believe me, I can appreciate the issue of forced offers for compensation, especially when applied to NAR or MLS systems that just won't let brokers operate within their environment unless they are paid their ongoing tribute. And brokers don't have a functional alternative. There is no other resources with which a broker can distribute its listings on the same scale. On top of that, with the various data syndication and licensing agreements between MLS systems and third-party sites like Zillow and Realtor.com, there's not even a practical direct-to-consumer option available to brokers. Enter the scrappy player in the room. Rex Homes is a discount brokerage and organization whose business model I don't really believe in, and I don't believe fundamentally will help consumers in the way they believe it will, and only make the problems we have in the real estate industry worse as they relate to competence, ability, and more importantly, driving value to the consumer. But it is one that has been loud inter-industry and a challenger to NAR's rule system. They have some gusto, and credit is due where credit is due. It sued NAR and Zillow in 2021 under another antitrust action, alleging its listings were hidden by Zillow essentially due to its bucking of the NAR-led system. NAR fired back and filed a countersuit alleging false and misleading advertising on the part of Rex, which was ultimately dismissed. Can't say that isn't kind of funny. The underlying suit, though, is now set for trial in September of 2023, and this, along with the other legal issues NAR is battling, is just another example of wasted resources. Resources that come from NAR members, myself, my organization, and the industry as a whole. When you get big enough, you become a target, so fair enough to NAR on that point. But sustained fighting over similar issues over several years with no resolution kind of indicates that where there is smoke, there may be fire. Now, for my take on all of this, I want to start with the real estate industry. Shame on you. In Florida, licensing requirements are similar to every other state in the nation, and here, it takes 108 classroom hours, which includes both pre- and post-licensing education, and a few $100s to become a licensed real estate agent. Only 260 classroom hours to become a broker, the individual licensed to supervise those who are out selling in the world, which includes the sales associate education. You know what else in Florida requires a combined 260 hours of classroom education to become licensed? A nail tech. I'm not kidding, Google it. And that's not a knock on the nail tech, just to be clear. The industry is under such fire because there are so many incompetent, unprofessional, and inexperienced people running around just playing real estate. You think if the public really saw the complete value in this industry, these sorts of upending class action suits would be happening? Nope. Let's just get right down to it. If buyers were the funding source of buyer-broker real estate fees, there would be no buyer brokers. And if there were, they would almost certainly only exist in the luxury market. And the reason is cost, pure and simple. Real estate ownership is not a cheap endeavor. Some 75% of homes in the US are financed. Financing is expensive between origination fees, tax and insurance escrow, general closing costs. The average transaction generates thousands of dollars in these closing costs. Now add in a sales commission and you're talking about a functional cost shutdown of buyer representation. And those on the lowest end of the affordability spectrum will suffer the most. The role of the listing broker is to represent the seller, to command the most value in the present for any given home. The role of a buyer broker is to represent the buyer, to be an advocate for their needs and defend their future value position. This balance is a part of what drives much of the real estate brokerage industry and ultimately the value of real estate as an asset class. This protection of individual sides of a transaction provides a check and balance to what would likely be a very wild back and forth in value, transaction activity, and many other driving market forces. Remember, everyone who is a seller was also once a buyer. The current operating model of the industry, generally speaking, places the commission payment obligation on the side of a seller because that is where there is a source of money to pay for real estate services. Some argue brokers vastly overcharge for what is otherwise a complete absence of service, and unfortunately, that can be true. But any broker worth their salt will very clearly articulate to a homeowner what is encompassing of their fee, what services, materials, marketing outlets, distribution mechanisms, etc. are included within the listing of their property for sale. At the end of the day, those brokers who offer a full level of service often outperform the fee that is charged by a very healthy margin. Now, all of this begs the question, should a seller be required to pay a buyer broker fee because that is what seems to make the most sense for property value and the movement of this asset class? Or should it be at their option? My personal view is very free market centric, and I believe anyone who is in business within any industry should be able to clearly articulate the value they offer to the consumer. Not just live within a system where their fees are, I'll air quote, guaranteed, regardless of their skill, diligence, competence, work ethic, etc. So really, who wins in all of this? It's definitely not the consumer. It's not the industry. Any guesses? I'll tell you. It's the lawyers. It's always the lawyers. You think the lawyers handling these cases give two about the real estate industry, defending value for homeowners, or any other productive outcome? No. In these cases, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of transactions and billions of dollars in what are being characterized as wrongful commission payments. What is seen by this group is the tens, if not hundreds of millions in potential legal fees. That's it. You think these individual plaintiffs are paying these attorneys to go after NAR and all of these other groups? No. They're contingency based. These lawyers get paid when these cases either settle or when a judgment is entered and all appeals have been exhausted. Now, I can go on for days about failed leadership, greed, improper incentive structure, and on and on and on. But at the end of the day, those within the industry who are legitimate practitioners need to do one thing and one thing only. That is to be the best you are able to be and to focus on your ability to be a commanding and dominant listing agent, which is the reason why Stockworth has constructed an entire school centered around real estate education, focused almost exclusively on becoming someone who can effectively list and sell real estate. These cases are likely to drag on for quite some time, maybe even years. If this whole thing goes in the direction of the plaintiffs, a listing skill set is one that will keep you working in this industry. In that line of thinking, if you are a real estate agent and you work only with buyers, it would be wise to use the time you have between now and whenever this is resolved to transition towards a listing-centric practice. I mean, look, you can't sell inventory in a store with empty shelves. This is also not likely to upend the entire industry overnight. I highly doubt there will just be a stoppage of buyer brokers. There will likely be a slow transition as practitioners within the industry shift towards whatever new rule set is put into place and new practices that are adopted. There will be people who leave the industry who cannot compete in a different environment, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a nature of the environment. Go work harder than the person next to you, connect with more people, and make fewer excuses about obstacles and failure. This is a tough business, and none of us are perfect. Keep your nose down and forge ahead. If you'd like for us to include any specific market information or topic of discussion, please let us know either in the comments, or if you are receiving the weekly mail emails, simply reply to that message and let us know. Remember, please like, share, and subscribe to either our social platforms or to the weekly mail email distribution list. With that, I hope to connect with you soon.